Okay, let's unpack this. I want you to picture a scenario, and I need you to be completely honest with yourself right now.
Oh, this should be good.
Have you ever found yourself sitting on your couch on a random Tuesday, fully intending to go to sleep at a reasonable hour because, you have a massive presentation at work the next morning,
Yeah.
but somehow, inexplicably, it is accidentally 2 a.m.?
Yep, we've all been there.
Right.
Yeah.
You are sitting there in the dark, staring at the glow of your screen, utterly and completely captivated by a group of sleep-deprived strangers trying to outwit each other on a deserted beach.
Or a lavish mansion.
Exactly. A group of impeccably dressed people arguing over something completely absurd and trivial in this over-the-top mansion. You know you need to sleep. Your alarm is going to go off for 4 hours.
But you just have to know.
You just have to know who gets voted out at the tribal council, or who gets the final rose, or who is secretly lying to the entire house in the dark. If you are nodding your head right now, I promise you are definitely not alone. Welcome to today's deep dive.
It is a universal modern experience, really. I mean, we have all been victims of that just one more episode mentality.
Yeah.
And it's actually the absolute perfect entry point for what we are exploring today.
Yeah.
Because what started decades ago as a quirky, almost experimental television novelty, putting real people in a house with cameras just to see what happens, has completely mutated. It has grown into an absolute juggernaut that dictates the entire entertainment industry.
I've got this massive stack of data sitting right in front of me, and it is, frankly, intimidating. We are looking at a huge pile of sources today to try and make sense of this whole landscape.
It's a lot to get through.
It is. So on the bottom of the stack, forming the foundation of everything we're about to talk about, is this incredibly dense, data-rich 2026 GitNux reality TV market report.
The Bible of unscripted economics.
Basically the phone book of it, yeah. Then we have official industry press releases from major players like Screen Queensland and Amazon Prime Video. We are pulling from professional, deep-in-the-weeds podcast analyses, too, specifically from the folks over at RHAP. Rob has a podcast.
Which is essential for the strategic breakdown.
Totally. And then, honestly, my favorite part of this entire stack, we are diving into the trenches of the ultimate superfan Reddit threads. We have pulled the most intense debates from the subreddits for Survivor, Big Brother, The Amazing Race, The Traitors, and Beast Games.
Which is exactly the kind of cross-section we need for this. We have the hard economic data, the polished corporate spin from the networks, the high-level strategic analysis from the podcasters, and the raw, unfiltered, sometimes completely unhinged reactions from the fans.
The fans who actually keep the lights on for these shows.
Right. Our goal for this deep dive is to explore how reality TV evolved from that late 90s novelty into a staggering $15 billion global industrial complex by the time we hit 2026.
Right, and we aren't just going to, list off facts and figures.
Exactly. I want us to establish an analytical framework right from the jump. We aren't just looking at what you're watching. We really need to explore the psychology of the modern superfan. We need to examine the shifting fortunes of the biggest franchises on both traditional television networks and the massive streaming platforms.
It's a whole ecosystem.
The whole thing. We're going to look at why this genre matters, how it actively drives real-world behavior, and how these highly engineered artificial social ecosystems serve as a direct reflection of our modern viewing habits.
So, to figure out how we got to this point, I think we really have to start by following the money. Let's look at the sheer scale of the billion-dollar reality ecosystem, pulling heavily from this GitNux data report. And I have to tell you, when I first read these numbers, I almost didn't believe them.
They are eye-watering.
The reality TV market hit $15 billion globally in 2023.
$15 billion.
$15 billion. To put that in perspective, that is a massive slice of the global entertainment economy dedicated entirely to unscripted content. But the stat that really stopped me in my tracks is about broadcast real estate. According to GitNux, reality programming now commands 35% of all U.S. primetime programming.
More than a third.
More than a third of what is broadcast during the most valuable, highly coveted hours of television is unscripted.
It is a staggering footprint. When you think about the legacy of American television, the golden age of sitcoms, the era of prestige police procedurals, the massive hospital dramas, all of that has been slowly but surely pushed aside to make room for reality TV.
Yeah.
And if you want to understand why network executives and streaming platform CEOs are dedicating a third of their prime real estate to this genre, you honestly don't have to look much further than the production budgets. The GitNux data provides a fascinating comparative breakdown that explains everything.
Walk me through the math on that, because when I watch a massive cinematic season of something like Survivor, it looks incredibly expensive to produce. I mean, they are flying hundreds of crew members out to Fiji, building massive challenge structures in the ocean, and operating high-end drones.
It does look expensive. And, relative to everyday life, it is. A standard season of Survivor,
Yeah.
and the report specifies we are talking about the traditional 39-day model here, which we will definitely dissect later costs, roughly $12 to $14 million to produce in total.
Yeah.
That covers everything: the crew, the locations, the challenge bills, the catering, the post-production, everything. Now let's compare that to another reality staple, The Bachelor.
Okay.
That show costs about $1 million per episode. So standard season might run around $10 to $12 million. Then you pivot to something heavily studio-based, completely reliant on celebrity talent, and massive elaborate physical sets like The Masked Singer.
Right.
That runs about $10 million for an entire season.
Okay, so you are looking at roughly $10 to $14 million to produce an entire season of high-end reality television. And that is providing networks with 10 to 15 hours of primetime content.
Precisely. Now contrast that with scripted television. In the current era of prestige streaming, a single episode of a high-end fantasy or science fiction show can cost $15 to $20 million alone.
One episode.
One episode. A network can produce an entire culturally dominant season of Survivor for less than the cost of 1 hour of a dragon-riding fantasy epic.
That is wild.
From a pure return on investment standpoint,
Right.
reality TV is the ultimate bargain for these networks. It mitigates risk while providing massive volume.
But the economics get even wilder when you look closely at where that money is actually going, specifically regarding the talent on screen, because the difference between the prize money on competition shows and the actual paychecks the cast receives on lifestyle shows is incredibly disparate.
It is a wild wage scale.
Yeah.
And it varies entirely depending on the perceived prestige and the specific format of the show. Let's look at the competition models first. The winner of the U.S. version of Big Brother spends nearly 100 days locked in a soundstage, completely isolated from the outside world, being filmed 24 hours a day. And the grand prize is $750,000.
Right.
Over on MTV, the challenge has spent years elevating its physical stakes to almost dangerous levels. And they now offer up to $1 million to the winner. But those are one-time payouts for a single victor. Everyone else goes home with a fraction of that, usually just a weekly stipend.
Right. You might spend a month starving on an island and go home with 10 grand if you make the jury. But then you pivot away from the competition shows and look at the docu-soaps, and the financial model flips completely on its head.
Exactly. Cast members on the Real Housewives franchises are not competing for a prize at the end of the season. They are receiving a negotiated salary.
And it's huge.
According to the GitNux data, the established veterans of those shows can make anywhere from $100,000 to over $1 million per season, simply to live their lives, go to extravagant dinners, and argue with their friends on camera. They have successfully monetized their very existence.
And then on the complete opposite end of the docu-soap spectrum, you have a show like Below Deck. This is a wildly popular franchise where the cameras follow the working crews of multi-million-dollar super yachts.
Highly demanding work.
Incredibly grueling physical labor. They are working 18-hour days, dealing with demanding, wealthy charter guests, scrubbing toilets, all while providing premium television drama. And what do they make? The GitNux report says the crews are earning roughly $10,000 to $15,000 a month during their charter seasons while filming.
Which is a standard maritime wage for that level of yachting, perhaps slightly elevated plus their share of the tips. But relative to the massive viewership they bring to the network, it is a staggering disparity compared to the Bravo housewives.
Completely.
The network is capturing lightning in a bottle by filming young, attractive people doing incredibly stressful jobs in confined quarters, and they're doing it for a fraction of the talent cost of a traditional reality soap.
It is a brilliant, albeit slightly exploitative business model. But clearly, the audiences don't care about the wage disparity because they keep coming back in droves. Though, as I'm looking at your notes here, the actual manner in which those audiences consume this content has shifted dramatically over the decades.
It has fundamentally shifted.
Okay.
And we need to understand that historical context to understand the 2026 landscape. If we look back at the historic viewership peaks of reality television, the numbers are almost unfathomable by today's metrics. Let's rewind to the year 2000.
Okay.
The season 1 finale of Survivor Richard Hatch, Winning the $1 Million, pulled in 28.3 million viewers. A few years later, the American Idol Season 2 finale, the Ruben Studdard and Clay Aiken Showdown, hit 38.1 billion viewers.
I remember that night. You literally could not go to work or school the next day without having an opinion on Ruben versus Clay.
Because those were monolithic, monocultural events. Everyone in the country, regardless of demographic, was watching the exact same thing at the exact same time. It was appointment viewing in the truest sense.
Right.
But today, we exist in a deeply fractured, hyper-fragmented streaming era. The GetNext report highlights a crucial statistic: streaming platforms now host 40% of all new reality content.
So nearly half of the new reality shows being produced aren't even airing on traditional broadcast networks. They are going straight to the cloud.
Right. Which means you don't have 38 million people sitting on their couches watching one show live on Wednesday night anymore. Instead, you have highly dedicated, hyper-niche audiences binging massive amounts of content on demand whenever and wherever they want.
The audience hasn't shrunk.
It is just dispersed across dozens of different platforms and hundreds of different formats.
That dispersion is fascinating, especially when you break down exactly who is watching what. The demographic split in the GetNext data paints a really clear picture of how different generations interact with unscripted content. Overall, women make up 58% of the reality TV audience, which has been a fairly consistent trend for a while.
It has.
But when you slice the data by age bracket, you start to see very distinct, almost tribal viewing preferences.
Let's start with Gen Z, which the report defines as the 18 to 24-year-old demographic. They lean incredibly heavily into a very specific subgenre dating shows. The data shows they have a massive 55% watch rate for the romance and dating genre.
Which makes total sense from a developmental psychology standpoint. You have a demographic that is actively navigating the complexities of modern dating, the absolute nightmare of dating apps, and they are projecting those anxieties onto heavily produced shows like Love Island or Too Hot to Handle.
They are watching other young people attempt to find connection in a controlled environment.
Exactly. It serves as both escapism and a bizarre form of social education. But then you look at millennials, the 18 to 34 bracket, and they are essentially the undisputed engine of the entire reality TV genre. According to GetNext, millennials watch 40% more reality TV overall than the average viewer.
They don't just stick to dating shows. They watch the competition formats, the docu-soaps, the culinary battles, the real estate dramas. They grew up as the genre grew up, and their media diet is thoroughly saturated by it.
But we absolutely cannot count out the older demographics. The data notes that the 45 to 54-year-old bracket makes up a solid 25% of the total viewership. So a quarter of the entire reality TV audience is middle-aged, likely tuning into legacy franchises that have been on the air for 2 decades, or pivoting to high-end lifestyle programming.
What's truly fascinating here, beyond just the age demographics, is how these viewing habits translate into tangible, real-world cultural and economic impact. We so often hear people dismiss reality TV as a guilty pleasure.
Oh, all the
In
time.
fact, GetNext notes that 65% of Americans actually use that exact phrase to describe their viewing habits. They feel a need to apologize for watching it. But the data quantifies just how much this quote-unquote unserious genre actively shapes our society.
I am so glad you brought this up, because the cultural metrics in this report are wild. For example, the data indicates that reality TV has inspired 20% of all small business startups.
Let's pause and really think about that number. 20%. 1 in 5 small business startups can trace its inspiration back to unscripted television.
When I first read that, I was skeptical. I thought, how are they defining a startup? But then you think about the monumental impact of a show like Shark Tank.
Exactly.
You have millions of people sitting at home watching everyday inventors pitch their products to billionaires, and suddenly the barrier to entry for entrepreneurship feels surmountable. They think, I have a good idea, I could do that.
Or you look at Project Runway inspiring independent fashion lines, or the massive influx of boutique bakeries that popped up after the Great British Baking Show became a global phenomenon.
It is a massive economic driver, and the wealth generation isn't just limited to the viewers at home. Look at the people actually on the screen.
Oh.
The Kardashian family leveraged their reality TV exposure to build a $1.8 billion empire.
They took the raw attention of a docu-soap and funneled it into cosmetics, shapewear, and lifestyle brands. They essentially wrote the blueprint for the modern influencer economy, entirely off the back of reality television.
And the influence trickles down into career choices, too. The report notes that the Bravo show Top Chef is directly credited with causing a 15% spike in culinary school enrollments nationwide.
People watched chefs sweating over a broken emulsion or a perfectly seared scallop and thought, that is the kind of pressure I want in my professional life.
They literally altered their career trajectories based on a television show.
It proves that reality television is not a passive viewing experience. It is highly active, highly influential content.
And I have to bring this one up because it just makes me laugh, but it is a perfect example of this exact phenomenon. Let's talk about the original Jersey Shore.
Oh boy.
Do you know they started out paying that cast just $10,000 an episode in the beginning? It was a microscopic budget for MTV. And in return, that specific cast, with their incredibly specific lifestyle, single-handedly boosted nationwide gym culture.
The GTL effect.
The whole GTL ethos, gym, tan, laundry, became an actual measurable phenomenon. Gym memberships spiked, tanning salon revenues went up. The show dictated a fitness and aesthetic trend for an entire generation of young adults.
It dictates fashion, vocabulary, entrepreneurial aspirations, fitness trends, and even how we process interpersonal conflict. And this brings us to an incredibly important concept when we look at the modern reality TV landscape in 2026.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting.
Because the sheer volume of content has increased so dramatically, it is no longer just about casually tuning in once a week. It is about the intensity and the sheer density of the engagement.
So we've established that this is a $15 billion industry that shapes everything from our small businesses to our gym habits. But how do we actually consume it when there is just so much of it? We have a brilliant article in our stack by Kanvar Gulati titled, A Reality TV Superfan's Dream Week.
It's a great piece.
It is. And Gulati does this incredible deep dive into the absolute madness that occurs when scheduling algorithms align perfectly to overwhelm the most dedicated viewers.
Gulati focuses his analysis on a very specific, highly chaotic week in February 2026. This is a week where the television calendar essentially conspired to deliver an unprecedented avalanche of premium reality content all at once. Let's look at the lineup he analyzes.
Okay.
On a Wednesday, you have the highly anticipated monumental premiere of Survivor 50. That same week, you have the premiere of a new season of Australian Survivor. Concurrently, Netflix executes a massive batch drop of new episodes for a new season of Love is Blind.
That's already so much.
And then, capping off this insane week, you have the grand finales for both Peacock's The Traitors and Amazon Prime's Beast Games.
Okay, if you are a fan of the genre, that is easily 7 to 8 hours of peak-tier, high-stakes television condensed into a single week. It's not just a schedule, it's a marathon. It's a second job.
It really is.
But what I love about Gulati's article is that he doesn't just look at this as a funny scheduling quirk. He actually analyzes the mathematics and the psychology behind what he calls viewer engagement density. How does the human brain process this much high-stakes reality TV in such a short window?
Gulati breaks it down into 3 distinct psychological impacts, categorized by the specific type of release format. First, you have the premieres. Psychologically, premieres are all about possibility, potential, and anticipation.
The slate is clean. Anyone could win.
Exactly. According to Gulati's analytics, premiere episodes drive 18 to 25% higher engagement across the board compared to mid-season episodes. That means social media mentions spike, Reddit traffic surges, podcast downloads explode, and YouTube reaction videos flood the internet.
And he specifically points out that for Survivor 50, which is a massive milestone season exclusively featuring returning legendary players, that premiere gets an additional 20% engagement boost on top of the baseline, just based on historical data for all-star seasons.
Because with returnee seasons, the audience doesn't have to spend 3 episodes learning who the cast is. They are already deeply emotionally invested in these players from years prior. The parasocial relationships are already forged. But then, in this hypothetical week, you stack the Australian Survivor premiere right on top of it. Now, Australian Survivor is a completely different beast than the American version. It is an incredibly grueling 47 to 55-day game with a much larger cast and significantly longer episodes.
It's an absolute marathon. And Gulati notes that this extended epic format boosts early emotional investment by 35%. Why? Because the audience knows what they are signing up for. They know they are buckling in for a very long, complex, deeply layered narrative arc. They aren't watching a sprint. They are watching a novel unfold over 2 months.
Right, so that covers the psychological anticipation of the premieres. Then, Gulati shifts his focus to the batch drops. This is the model pioneered by Netflix, and he specifically looks at Love is Blind. Batch drops do not rely on weekly anticipation. They are designed for total, overwhelming immersion.
Just consume it all.
Exactly. When Netflix drops a cluster of 4 or 5 episodes at once, the data shows it increases the 72-hour completion rate by 60%.
Meaning that within 3 days of the episodes going live, 60% more people have finished all the available content compared to a traditional weekly release. It demands that you consume it immediately.
It creates these massive, highly condensed spikes in social sentiment. Because the audience knows that the moment those episodes hit the server, the clock starts ticking on spoilers. Everyone is rushing to watch the pod dates, the dramatic reveals, the inevitable catastrophic breakups on the honeymoon, and they are doing it at warp speed so they could participate in the digital conversation without having the outcome ruined for them.
It is the ultimate water cooler moment. But the water cooler is now entirely digital, global, and operates at 2x speed. You can't casually watch Love is Blind over a month. You have to consume it in a weekend or the internet will ruin it for you.
Exactly.
And finally, Gulati analyzes the finales. So we have anticipation with premieres, immersion with batch drops, and finales are entirely about resolution.
You have invested weeks, maybe months of your life into tracking these people, and now you psychologically require the payoff. Finales naturally generate 30 to 35% higher live engagement than standard episodes. People will actively avoid binging and tune in live with the commercials just to experience the resolution in real time with the rest of the viewing public.
And crucially, Gulati notes that finales cause a massive 50% spike in podcast listenership the morning after.
Because the episode ends, but the mental processing isn't over. People need to hear the post-game analysis. They need to hear their favorite podcasters decompress the winner's strategy, critique the bitter jury, or break down the final twist. It's a required cool-down period for the superfan brain.
And this brings us to Gulati's most fascinating conclusion, the concept of engagement stacking. When you have overlapping fandoms consuming all 3 of these release formats in a single week, say, the people who rigorously analyze the strategic gameplay of Survivor are also the same people tuning in to the social deduction mechanics of the Traitors. You see an 18 to 22% cross-platform boost in overall engagement. It is a compounding psychological effect.
Gulati calls it emotional diversification, which is such a brilliant way to phrase it. Your brain is actively building thematic bridges between completely unrelated television shows.
Let's visualize this. Imagine you were on the couch. On Wednesday night, you watch a brutal, incredibly callous strategic blindside on Survivor. Your brain processes the betrayal. Then on Thursday, you open Netflix, and you are watching the Love is Blind batch drop, and you witness a massive, heartbreaking romantic betrayal in the pods.
And then on Friday,
you fire up Peacock for the Traitors finale, and you watch a shocking, tear-filled banishment at the round table.
You are not consuming those 3 pieces of content in isolated vacuums. Your brain is actively cross-referencing the human behavior. You are comparing the lying on an island to the lying in a dating pod to the lying in a Scottish castle.
Wow, yeah.
You are analyzing how highly pressurized environments force ordinary people to abandon their moral compasses in different ways. It requires a tremendous amount of cognitive load to track the alliances, the lies, and the emotional states of dozens of different people across 5 different shows in 1 week.
So if you are listening to this right now, I want you to think about your own viewing habits. When you interact with this genre, what does your brain actually prefer? Do you prefer the slow, drip-feed anticipation of waiting for a traditional weekly premiere on a broadcast network, where you have 7 days to debate a single strategic move with your friends?
Or do you crave the intense, overwhelming immersion of a streaming batch drop,
where you willingly lose your entire Saturday to the drama and emerge completely exhausted but satisfied? It is a total different psychological experience, and the industry is actively fighting over which model will ultimately win.
They absolutely are. The traditional broadcast networks are acutely aware of this shifting psychology. They are fighting tooth and nail to maintain their legacy status in a world that is increasingly rewarding the binge model.
Which leads us perfectly into the next segment of our sources. So we've seen how the audience consumes the content. Now let's look at how the legacy networks are trying to keep that audience from abandoning ship. Let's look at the state of the CBS Titans. We are talking about the foundational pillars of reality television Survivor, Big Brother, and The Amazing Race.
Let's start with the granddaddy of them all, the show that essentially built the modern reality landscape, Survivor. As we discussed, the show is heading into its monumental season 50 in 2026. This should be a massive celebratory victory lap.
But it isn't quite playing out that way.
No. If you dive into the superfan Reddit threads, specifically our Survivor, The mood is surprisingly dark. It is highly critical. Fans are incredibly vocal about their frustrations with what production officially branded the new era of Survivor.
The new era began after the pandemic, and it introduced several fundamental structural changes to the game that the audience is still struggling to accept. The most glaring change was the length of the game. Survivor was historically a 39-day endurance test. In the new era, the game was permanently shortened to 26 days.
Additionally, there's a widespread fan perception of an endless, convoluted barrage of twists, hidden advantages, and lost votes that clutter the narrative. And finally, there's a massive amount of pushback against the mandatory Final Four fire-making challenge.
Oh, fans are so fed up with that mandatory fire making. It's like you survive 25 days of intense social politics, you manipulate your way to the Final Four, and then your entire game, your entire $1 million resume comes down to whether you can strike a flint and burn a rope faster than the guy sitting next to you.
It takes the social agency away from the players. The overarching critique on Reddit is really telling. Fans are complaining that the modern edit makes the show feel much more like watching people play a highly complex board game rather than watching a true sociological survival experiment. The mechanics of the game, the idols, the journeys, the risk-reward games have overtaken the human element.
The audience feels like they are watching people execute a rule book rather than watching them interact as human beings. We actually listened to a fantastic breakdown on this exact phenomenon from the RHAP podcast network. Rob has a podcast, which is basically the gold standard for reality TV strategy analysis.
They do incredible work.
Rob Cesternino, Mike Bloom, and Shannon Gus did a massive deep dive where they ranked the winners of the new era from season 41 all the way through season 49. And their analysis really highlighted the weird, contradictory state of modern Survivor gameplay.
For example, they spent a lot of time discussing Gabler's win back in season 43. They noted how his undercover strategy, hiding in plain sight, playing the fool while quietly positioning himself in the middle of warring factions, was strategically brilliant. But they also acknowledged that it was highly frustrating for a large portion of the viewership who wanted flashier, aggressive resume moves.
The audience has been conditioned to want big television moments.
Right. But the mechanics of the new era often reward players who actively avoid the spotlight.
You stick your neck out in the new era, you get your head chopped off. They also praised a player named Dee for her all-around dominance in her season, noting she was one of the few who managed to control the chaotic mechanics rather than let the mechanics control her. But the part of the podcast that really stood out to me was their discussion of season 48.
Season 48 is a perfect case study for the current tension between the producers and the fans. If you look at the Reddit consensus when Season 48 was airing, it initially skewed quite negative. The superfans were complaining because the season lacked those massive, jaw-dropping blindside moments. There were no crazy idle plays or convoluted strategic flips.
But the RHAP hosts, and a slowly growing contingent of fans upon a rewatch, have actually come around to praising Season 48 specifically for that reason.
Because it forced the edit to focus on the people.
Exactly. They praised it because the season was anchored by a deep, genuine, completely organic connection between two players, Joe and Eva. Their relationship, their loyalty to each other, grounded the season in actual human emotion. And Kyle's ultimate victory in that season was deemed highly satisfying, precisely because he managed to outmaneuver the more robotic, purely strategic GameBot style of gameplay.
He won with emotional intelligence rather than advantage management.
It proves that even with all the advantages, the shortened 26-day timeline, and the board game mechanics, the audience still fundamentally craves authentic human connection. They want to see people rely on each other, betray each other, and forgive each other based on emotion, not just because a piece of parchment told them they lost their vote.
So Survivor is dealing with this massive structural identity crisis.
Yeah.
But then you look at their sister show, and the narrative flips entirely. Let's pivot to Big Brother. Surprisingly, the U.S. version of Big Brother is currently experiencing a massive, unexpected renaissance in 2026.
It really is a remarkable turnaround. For years, the U.S. Big Brother fandom was plagued by complaints of stagnant gameplay, massive mega-alliances that steamrolled the season, and predictable outcomes. But BB26, and specifically BB27, have been critically acclaimed within the fandom.
Season 27 utilized a highly praised murder mystery theme that permeated the house design and the competitions, and it was a massive hit. The producers introduced new structural mechanics like the blockbuster twist and the AI arena twist, which essentially revitalized the strategic landscape.
The AI arena specifically forced the players to scramble right up until the live eviction, which broke up those boring, week-long steamroll alliances. It wasn't entirely smooth sailing, though. If you read the Our Big Brother subreddit, fans are quick to point out that the producers still occasionally shoot themselves in the foot. There was a specific twist in season 27 called the White Locust twist.
Yes, the white locust twist. For context, this twist essentially allowed a player to secretly steal the head of household's nominations and replace them in the middle of the night, completely overriding the established power dynamic of the week.
And it was universally despised by the fan base. Reddit was in a total uproar, saying it gave way too much unearned power to a single player and completely negated the social maneuvering of the week. It almost tanked the entire season. But, and this is the crucial part that separates a good season from a bad one, the stellar casting saved it.
The cast was
The
phenomenal.
players in the BB27 house were so dynamic, so willing to confront each other, and so wildly entertaining that they managed to push through the bad production interference and deliver a great season anyway.
Which brings us to a very interesting international contrast. While the U.S. Big Brother has found its footing by casting aggressive, dynamic players, the U.K. version of Big Brother is currently struggling with a severe identity crisis.
It is rough over there right now.
Big Brother UK made a massive commitment for 2026, extending their season to be the longest in a decade, bringing back AJ and Will to host. However, the ratings have absolutely plummeted. They dropped from a respectable 1.4 million viewers down to a very concerning 700,000.
They lost half their audience, and if you dive into the Eric Bretherick Reddit threads, it is basically a war zone trying to figure out why. The fandom is completely fractured. And I want to pause here for a second to be absolutely clear with you, the listener. We are strictly playing messenger here. We are impartially reporting the Reddit comments as an observation of fan division without taking any political side or endorsing either viewpoint. We're just looking at how highly polarized the viewership has become.
Exactly. Our role is strictly to report the data and the sentiment. And the sentiment on the UK Reddit is divided into two fiercely opposed camps. On one side, you have a massive group of users who are furiously complaining that the casting department relies far too heavily on what they explicitly call right-wing grifters, meaning they believe producers are intentionally casting highly controversial, politically provocative individuals simply to stir up cheap outrage and strive engagement.
And then, on the exact opposite side of the spectrum, you have another group of users who are equally furious, claiming that the show has devolved into an insufferable woke parade that focuses entirely on identity politics and social justice issues, rather than organic housemate drama.
It is a perfect, somewhat depressing microcosm of how modern audiences project their real-world political frustrations directly onto a reality television cast.
Yeah.
The audience can't even agree on what is ruining the show. They just know they are angry at it.
And those deep divisions have had real consequences for the franchise. The network, ITV, recently announced that the highly anticipated Celebrity Big Brother UK edition has been officially rested for 2026. Rested is essentially television executive speak for canceled for the foreseeable future.
Which absolutely enraged the core fan base.
Totally enraged them, because in 2025, the celebrity version was incredible. Housemates Chris and JoJo created some of the biggest, most viral pop culture moments of the entire year in the UK. So why cancel it? Well, the primary complaint from the purists on Reddit is that ITV ruined the core premise of the show by trying to modernize it for the wrong audience.
Fans argued that the editors were trying to make Big Brother look and feel too much like Love Island. They were adding cheap pop music over serious conversations, forcing contrived showmances, and editing out the raw, mundane, psychological weirdness that makes Big Brother so compelling.
They alienated their core older demographic by desperately trying to chase the Gen Z Love Island audience, and in doing so, they lost both. It is a cautionary tale about respecting your format. Speaking of respecting the format, let's briefly look at the third CBS Titan the Amazing Race.
This show is a fascinating outlier in the reality landscape because it is heavily praised by its superfans for actively sticking to its core format.
Right, they haven't fundamentally broken the mechanics of the race. Teams of two travel the world, follow clues, and don't get eliminated unless they come in last. But they are suffering from entirely different modern issues. If you look at Feth Amazing Race, the biggest complaint right now is heavy fatigue from the network mandate to produce 90-minute episodes.
CBS forced both Survivor and The Amazing Race to expand to 90 minutes to fill airtime. But while Survivor uses that time for camp life and strategy, The Amazing Race struggles. The extra 30 minutes just leads to repetitive footage of teams doing the exact same physical challenge rather than exploring deeper strategy or character development.
And there is a larger existential problem that the show has faced for a decade now. Modern technology has completely broken the early magic of the premise.
It has. The golden era of The Amazing Race in the early 2000s was defined by absolute chaos at ticket counters, teams getting hopelessly lost in foreign cities, and language barriers completely halting progress. But today, smartphones have completely ruined that.
You literally cannot get lost in a major European city when every single local you ask for directions has Google Maps in their pocket. You can use translation apps. The inherent friction of global travel has been smoothed out by technology, which fundamentally alters the skill set required to win the race. It's less about navigation and more about just running fast.
However, the producers are trying to innovate within those constraints. Season 37, which featured a new game-altering twist in every single leg, was heavily praised for keeping the racers constantly off balance and preventing a dominant team from steamrolling.
Looking ahead to 2026, we know Season 39 is already filmed and slated for the fall schedule. And the rampant speculation dominating the Reddit threads right now is that Season 40 is being primed as a massive milestone all-star season to celebrate the legacy of the show.
So we spent a lot of time looking at these traditional network titans, Survivor, Big Brother, The Amazing Race, the UK franchises. They're all actively tinkering around the edges. They are adding twists, changing episode lengths, and fighting with their fan bases about authenticity. They're trying to balance their two-decade-old legacies with modern attention spans.
But while CBS and ITV are making these minor adjustments, the streaming giants are throwing ungodly amounts of money at the genre to disrupt it entirely.
It is a totally different scale of investment. This brings us to the streaming disruptors. We need to look closely at what Amazon is doing with Beast Games, what Peacock is doing with the Traitors, and what Netflix is building with the Golden Ticket.
Let's start with the absolute elephant in the room, Prime Video's Beast Games. I don't think people fully comprehend the sheer scale of Beast Games. The numbers associated with this show are terrifyingly large.
According to the Amazon press release, 50 million viewers tuned in. 50 million.
In an era of fragmented viewing, that is a monolithic number. Amazon immediately renewed it for seasons 2 and 3 before the first season even finished airing. And the stakes. The grand prize was an absurd $10 million.
From an analytical and industry standpoint, Beast Games represents a massive tectonic shift in corporate priorities for the streaming platforms. Amazon poured an absolute fortune into this unscripted spectacle, partnering with the biggest YouTuber on the planet, Mr. Beast.
And as television critics astutely noted at the time, Amazon renewed this massive reality competition at the direct, immediate expense of critically acclaimed, highly expensive scripted shows like the fantasy epic The Wheel of Time.
They looked at the spreadsheets and realized that the return on investment for a high-stakes, unscripted competition, fronted by a mega-influencer who comes with a built-in audience of hundreds of millions of subscribers, far outstrips the ROI of a prestige fantasy drama with dragons and CGI.
Why pay actors when you can pay regular people to suffer for our amusement?
Exactly. The core dynamic of the first season was built around this massive sociological premise. 100 smart contestants competing against 100 strong contestants. It was brains versus brawn on a scale we had never seen. And the finale was incredibly controversial, highlighting how modern prize money changes human behavior.
The ultimate winner, Tyler, was presented with a choice at the end. He had earned a $100,000 advantage throughout the game. He could have split it or used it to help others, but he opted to ruthlessly keep his $100,000 advantage for himself.
Which sparked massive, vitriolic debates online about fairness, greed, and the social contract of reality TV. When Tyler kept that money, he basically signaled that in the modern streaming era, pure self-interest completely overrides any sense of community or tribe mentality. He played strictly for himself.
But the most fascinating critique of Beast Games doesn't come from the industry analysts. It comes directly from the superfans. If you go to the Our Beast Games subreddit, the fans are absolutely tearing apart the storytelling and the editing of the season. Because when you scale a game up to 200 people, the editors face an impossible task making the audience care about any of them.
And the editors failed spectacularly in the back half of the season. According to the Reddit threads, the editors realized early on that two specific contestants, Monica and Jim, were absolute gold. Monica was a powerhouse. She was making massive strategic moves. She famously sold a coin advantage in a brilliant negotiation, and she was essentially physically carrying Jim through multiple grueling challenges.
The editors fell in love with them and made them the main characters of the entire season. We saw everything through their perspective.
Which is standard reality TV editing practice. You focus on your stars. But Beast Games didn't have producer safety nets to protect those stars. When Monica and Jim were unexpectedly, suddenly eliminated from the massive, chaotic physical challenges, the editors completely panicked. They had spent all their screen time building up these two characters, and suddenly they were gone.
The result was a narrative disaster. The show was forced to use a bizarre, confusing cliffhanger at the end of episode 8 because the remaining finalists who actually made it to the end felt like total strangers.
The Reddit fans literally called the finalists NPCs, non-playable characters.
The audience had zero emotional connection to the people actually competing for the $10 million because the editors hadn't bothered to introduce them properly in episode 1.
It highlights the extreme danger of relying on massive, manufactured physical spectacle over organic, character-driven storytelling. You can throw a $10 million prize pool at a game, you can have Mr. Beast host it, but if you don't edit the final players to be compelling human beings that the audience cares about from the very beginning, the finale falls completely flat.
The scale means nothing without a soul. Now let's contrast that disaster with a show that thrives entirely, 100%, on intense character interaction and psychological warfare. The Traitors.
The Traitors is an absolute, undeniable phenomenon. It is a masterclass in format localization. Peacock in the US and the BBC in the UK struck absolute gold with this concept. The recent season 4 saw a 66% surge in viewership, logging an astonishing 3.2 billion minutes watched. People cannot look away from the roundtables.
And the The Traitors subreddit is easily one of the most active, conspiracy-laden hives of speculation on the internet. We were reading through the fan pitch rumors for the upcoming season, and people are scrutinizing every single rumor. Fans are saying a contestant named Tara is desperately campaigning to producers to be cast as a traitor. There's a wild rumor that another contestant, Johnny, is actively hiding his real-life relationship to a fellow cast member to gain a secret voting block advantage.
Fans are already predicting that Steven is going to play the exact same flawed, overly aggressive, trap-setting game as Season 2's Peter, which will inevitably get him banished.
The level of intense meta-analysis is staggering. But the biggest news generating heat on the subreddit is that a normie season for the US, meaning a season featuring everyday, regular people instead of reality TV celebrities, is officially confirmed to be in the works.
And that decision has sparked an absolute civil war within the fandom. If you read the threads, there is a massive, highly vocal faction of fans who fiercely love the celebrity casting. Specifically, they love the reality TV veterans pulled from the Real Housewives franchises on Bravo.
They claim that the housewives are the only reason the show is entertaining because those women inherently understand how to produce premium drama. They know how to wear an outfit, point a finger, and deliver a devastating one-liner at a gothic roundtable.
They view the show as high camp. But on the complete opposite side, you have the format purists. These fans look at the celebrity version and call it a glorified Hunger Games talk show.
They argue that putting media-trained celebrities in the castle ruins the psychological integrity of the game. They want regular people back. They want the raw, unfiltered, deeply uncomfortable paranoia of people who aren't thinking about their brand deals or their Instagram followers while they lie to their friends. They want the stakes to feel real, not manufactured for a soundbite.
It is the ultimate debate over what makes reality TV good professional entertainers acting out a scenario, or real people actually cracking under pressure. And while Peacock is leaning heavily into that psychological social deduction space, Netflix is taking reality competition into a wildly different, aggressively aesthetic direction with a massive new 2026 show called The Golden Ticket.
This might be the most fascinating project in the entire stack of sources. The Golden Ticket is a completely original Wonka-inspired social experiment currently filming out in Queensland, Australia. According to the official Screen Queensland press release, the sheer scale of the production is staggering.
It is generating $17 million for the local Australian economy, employing hundreds of local film crews, set builders, and technicians.
I am so fascinated by the concept of this show. It is set in this massive, elaborate, retro-futuristic dreamscape. Think giant candy aesthetics mixed with dystopian clockwork machinery. And within this whimsical environment, the contestants are subjected to intense, grueling mental and physical tests.
If we cross-reference this new format with the GitNux viewing data we discussed earlier, Netflix's strategy becomes incredibly clear. The Golden Ticket is a highly engineered hybrid format designed to simultaneously capitalize on two massive, proven surges in streaming viewership. First, there is the massive global appetite for visually spectacular culinary and baking reality shows.
Think of the viral success of shows like Is It Cake? Or the complex chocolate sculptures in School of Chocolate, Audiences love watching whimsical, food-based art.
Right, but those shows are usually very low stakes and
It's
friendly.
exact.
So Netflix is taking that candy-coated visual aesthetic and slamming it into the second massive viewership trend, the demand for high-stakes, ruthless, dystopian strategy games. We saw this explode with Squid Game, The Challenge, and of course, The Traitors. By combining a whimsical chocolate factory aesthetic with brutal, cutthroat social strategy and physical elimination tests, Netflix is actively trying to engineer the ultimate reality hybrid.
They want the baking show audience and the survival strategy audience to tune into the exact same massive spectacle.
It sounds totally unhinged. You have people running around a giant, retro-futuristic chocolate river, actively plotting to backstab each other to avoid elimination. I will absolutely be binging it on day one.
But this push toward massive, artificial, retro-futuristic dreamscapes brings us to a fascinating global counter-trend. We've talked extensively about the US platforms, the UK formats, and the streaming giants throwing millions at elaborate sets. Now we need to look at what the actual fans are begging for. We are moving to the final piece of our puzzle, the international meta and the plea for normal. And to do that, we return to the thunder from down under, Australian Survivor.
Australian Survivor is highly regarded by global superfans for its epic scale, its incredible cinematography, and its deeply complex gameplay. As we discussed earlier, they are heading into 2026 with a highly anticipated redemption theme. This season is structured as a captain season, meaning a handful of returning, veteran legendary players will be brought back to lead tribes of entirely brand new contestants.
It's a classic format designed to mix the nostalgia of returning players with the chaos of newbies. But if you dive into the Survivoro subreddit, the fans are not celebrating. They are practically begging the producers to stop with the gimmicks. There's extreme, palpable pushback regarding the forced thematic titles that the show has relied on for years.
Recent seasons of the Australian iteration were burdened with massive, overwrought titles like Titans vs. Rebels or Heroes vs. Villains. The fans on Reddit rightly point out that these themes are essentially just marketing clickbait. The producers shoehorn complex human beings into these arbitrary binary categories.
For example, they will cast a lovely person who happens to work in middle management at an accounting firm and explicitly brand them as a ruthless titan of industry just to fit the theme.
And the most insulting part to the audience is that the entire heavily marketed theme is completely abandoned the second the tribes inevitably swap in episode 4.
They spend a month promoting Titans vs. Rebels, and 3 weeks into the show, everyone is mixed up on different beaches, and the theme is never mentioned again. It feels incredibly patronizing to a sophisticated audience that just wants to watch the strategic game unfold.
There is a growing, palpable, global superfan desire for purely organic formatting. They are exhausted by the artificial themes. When the Australian producers ran an Australia versus the World season, the fans universally loved it.
Why? Because the premise was inherently clean, factual, and the stakes were naturally defined by national pride. There was no forced metaphor. Now the fans are on Reddit actively begging the producers for a straightforward second chance this season, featuring players who lost early, or even a return to a simple Redemption Island setup.
They want structural mechanics that actually impact the gameplay rather than marketing slogans. They want a format that fixes the pacing issues of a 50-day game, like those frustrating non-elimination episodes where a vote gets canceled just to stretch the schedule. They want a mechanical fix rather than relying on forced, heavily produced archetypes.
If we connect this specific Australian critique to the much bigger picture of the entire reality television landscape we've explored today, it all comes back to a single, overriding concept: authenticity.
The data shows us time and time again that modern reality TV relies entirely on massive, breakout human characters to sustain these incredibly long, complex editing narratives.
You absolutely need a Monica carrying her partner through physical torture in Beast Games, or a Gabler operating hilariously undercover in Survivor, or a Joe and Eva falling in love on season 48. You need the human element.
But the modern audience's radar for nonsense and producer manipulation is sharper than it has ever been in the history of the medium. When networks rely too heavily on established influencers who are clearly acting, or players who are meta superfans clearly just trying to optimize their screen time for a podcast career, the audience recoils.
Or when producers force a heavy-handed narrative theme that clearly doesn't fit the actual reality of the beach or the house, the audience actively rejects it.
They reject the manufactured feel of it all.
We saw it clearly in the massive backlash to the Big Brother UK editing trying to mimic Love Island. We see it in the ongoing, relentless criticisms of the Survivor New Era board game mechanics. We see it in the anger over the Beast Games NPCs.
The audience wants the human experiment to feel real, even if they are fully intellectually aware that the environment they are watching is completely 100% artificial. It is an incredibly delicate, multi-billion-dollar tightrope walk for producers. They have to engineer a scenario crazy enough to grab your attention in a fragmented market, but cast it with people authentic enough to keep you watching for 20 hours.
So let's take a breath and recap this incredible journey we've taken through the data today. We started by looking at the sheer economic reality, the staggering $15 billion engine of reality television, a genre that now aggressively dictates 35% of all American primetime broadcasting.
We broke down the intense mathematics and the deep psychology of the superfan's dream week, exploring how our brains process the anticipation of premieres, the exhausting immersion of batch drops, and the resolution of finales.
We analyzed the ongoing existential format struggles of the legacy CBS Titan, Survivor, Big Brother, and The Amazing Race as they desperately try to innovate with twists and AI arenas without completely alienating their 20-year-old legacy audiences.
We looked at the massive, completely disruptive streaming dominance of Amazon's $10 million Beast Games experiment and Netflix's upcoming, utterly bizarre, retro-futuristic golden ticket.
And finally, we explored the global superfan demand, echoing from the Australian outback to the UK houses, for authentic gameplay and real human connection over manufactured clickbait themes.
It has been a comprehensive, deeply analytical look at a genre that is forced to constantly, endlessly reinvent itself just to hold our fractured attention spans.
It really has. But before we wrap up this conversation, I want to leave you, the listener, with a brand new concept to ponder, something to really chew on the next time you fire up a streaming app at 2 in the morning.
A provocative thought.
Given the Get Next data revealing that reality TV creates massive business empires, dictates fitness trends, and launches mega influencers like the Kardashians, we have to ask a fundamental question. Can the pure social experiment genre even exist anymore? If every single person stepping onto a deserted island, walking into a camera-filled house, or entering a retro-futuristic chocolate factory inherently knows that their screen time is essentially a high-stakes, globally broadcast audition for a million-dollar lifestyle brand, will we ever see a truly naive reality TV cast again? Or is the unavoidable future of the genre just watching 16 competing business plans masquerading as human beings?